alone in doing that. I wasn't alone in doing that. And boy, Harvey, I'm not going to repeat everything I said up to now. So anyway, the people that get this recording will have to get some money back from Stephen or Phil. I probably got drunk a couple of times, but nothing really serious. But I did get in trouble a couple of times, but so made it through college, was graduated from that, and registered to go to graduate school and got in graduate school. And my grades weren't good enough to get for a draft deferment. So I was going to get drafted, and I enlisted in the Coast Guard and went into OCS, and in forming company for OCS, they found out Dan had asthma. I didn't know I had asthma, but they found out I had asthma. And so I got mustered out, I guess it was a 4F, and got back and made my way through graduate school with mediocre grades, but I got an MBA. And but in graduate school, my drinking went from beer to liquor. And I was introduced to martinis and many other drinks because I guess graduate school students think they should be doing that kind of stuff. And I did. And there, my drinking escalated a little bit, but again, no blackouts, probably got sick occasionally, but nothing really great, no alarm bells. And let me also say that since my parents weren't drinkers and there wasn't really drinking in my circle, I knew nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous at all. So in graduate school, I met a young lady in undergraduate school, and we started dating and fell in love. And eventually I asked her to marry me. She lived in New York, the New York City area, and I traveled out there a couple times. Her father was in the liquor business, but that, I didn't get drunk with her or in any of those occasions. So it was sort of an ease into my out of control drinking. We got married and had 3 lovely children. I was working at the time, I had my MBA, and I was working my way up the corporate ladder. Drinking was not permitted at lunch hour in our establishment. They frowned on that. So, that wasn't any big deal for me. But folks, eventually it did become a big deal. Liquor, alcoholism is a progressive disease, and I proved that to myself and all those around me. I would take the bus from our apartment in Chicago to work back and forth. And somewhere along the line, I thought, well, you know what? I think Chicago had an evening paper, the Daily News. I think I'll stop and read that before I go home and have the demands of my wife, and at that time, 2 daughters. I needed a little time for Dan alone. So I stopped at some local bars at the end of the bus stop and had a few drinks and went home. And sometimes I had more than a few drinks and went home. And then the Daily News went out of business, and I still stopped at those bars. I didn't have a newspaper to read, but by then liquor was starting to take its own drink on me. And I would go home to an absolutely adoring wife. She loved the fact that I was home. She would meet me occasionally with a martini at the door. And she was raised by a mother who said that there's a lot of competition out there, so you better look your best when your husband comes home. And she did. She was a wonderful wife. Liquor was starting to take a bigger and bigger toll on me, though, and I was stopping longer and longer. And I was now evading that rule of no drinking at lunchtime. So I couldn't drink with the other people that I normally went out with at work. So I would go to a place and drink by myself, and then come back to work in the afternoon. Liquor was taking a toll on our marriage, and I was becoming unfaithful to this wonderful woman. By then, we had a third daughter, and I'm the one that said that I really need to get out. Pressure is on me. I can't handle this anymore. I wanted to go off really drinking by myself. And so I instigated a divorce and had my own apartment then. And eventually I would agree that Diana was okay for her to move with our three daughters to the West Coast, because then I wouldn't have the responsibility of being with them. And this responsibility made me very careless. And I'll tell you a story for which I am not proud at all, but it's part of Dan's story. When these three kids were still living in Chicago, I had visitation rights. So I would go on the weekends, and one particular Sunday, I picked them up and we went over to the Lincoln Park Zoo, and we were going there, and I was looking at my watch because at that time they had some laws in Chicago that the bars on Sunday couldn't open until noon. At noontime, I parked my three daughters in the children's zoo of Lincoln Park and said, I will be back shortly. I had to make a phone call. And I went and found a bar and had several drinks, left those three children alone in Lincoln Park Zoo. Nothing to be proud of, but it is part of my story. It's what drink was doing to Dan, and how lucky I am that nothing happened to these children. I drove drunk with these kids. I drove drunk with their friends in the car. All these things were things that normal people don't do, but Dan didn't think he had a problem. After Diana moved to the West Coast with the girls, I was all on my own drinking, and I would arrange vacations to go and pick them up, and we would go to Arizona, go to different nice spots. I had a good job. I had money in my jeans. I wasn't anything unmanageable about my life. And many times I was driving drunk or would be drunk at the resort that we attended. Whenever we went there, we'd buy groceries for their room. I always had my own room. And then I would buy liquor for my room. All this going on with three children, and I didn't think they knew anything about it. Fast forward a little bit, things were really getting out of control. Back at work, I was missing work. I was starting to drink in the morning. I was now just about drinking around the clock. I would get up in the morning, and many of us can identify with this, and say, I'm not drinking this morning. And before I went out the door, I'd have one drink for the nerve to go to work. I was then drinking for the nerve to go out on a date. I was then drinking for nerve to go out drinking. I was drinking for the nerve to go to work. Dan was a lush and didn't even know it. I had an appointment one morning for a physical with a friend of mine, a doctor, and I had my annual physical with him, and he was examining me. He said, hey, when did you have your last drink? And I looked at him, I said, oh, we have a convention in town. I had one probably about 2 o'clock this morning. When in truth, I had the drink for the nerve to go for my physical, and I lied to him. About a week later, I can't remember what it was that triggered me to call him up and say, Tom, you know, that day I had that drink. Oh, he said, Dan, funny, you smell just like the Bowery bums I used to treat in medical school. That got me. And about a week later, I called him up and said, Tom, I may have a drinking problem. He said, okay, I have a friend who's a psychiatrist. I suggest you make an appointment and go see him. I went to see the psychiatrist. He had an interview with me. I made an appointment to go back the following week. The following week, I went back, and before we even started talking, he said, Dan, I don't think there's anything mentally wrong with you. I just think that you're an alcoholic. And I thought that I was devastated by that. I would much rather be insane than be an alcoholic. I thought that you could get a pill for insanity, or you could sit down on a couch and someone could talk you out of your insanity. But I did know that if you were an alcoholic, even though I didn't know much, by then I knew a little bit about Alcoholics Anonymous, but even then I knew that you had to do something about yourself as an alcoholic if you were going to stop drinking. I said to the psychiatrist, and I give him credit for this. I said, what should I do? He said, there's a AA program over at a local hospital here. I suggest you call them and go in for an evaluation. Okay, so I called them and went in for an evaluation. The evaluation date they gave me was for Labor Day of 1977. And I suppose some of you know that people who do evaluations are young, either men or women. But in the field, I ended up with a very attractive woman who did my evaluation. And I spent about 80% of my time lying to her and about 20% of my time trying to get in her pants. And I wasn't successful on either part, because she said at the end, I don't know, Mr. Cotter, what you are or who you are, but I suggest you go to AA. And I said, where can I find AA? She says, there happens to be a meeting in this building tonight at 7:30. I said, okay, I'll go. And I did. But you know why I went? Because I thought in her secret way, she was trying to make a date with me. Insanity. Trying to make a date with me, and she was going to be at that meeting. So I got to the meeting early. Here's God's humor again. Guess who I met when I walked in the door? I met a guy named Bill who had tattoos on both arms and on his legs, and he was sitting on the end of the table. He had a world-class beer belly, and he looked at me and he said, welcome, my name is Bill and I'm an alcoholic. And I about died. I would not associate with this guy at a bar. Why would I associate with him? But I didn't have the nerve to back out. And so I met Bill and we sat down, and about 100 people filled up this room. I don't remember too much about what was said that night, but I do remember the person giving the lead was a little Sammy Davis Jr. clone. And he talked the entire time that he gave the lead to a switch plate on the side of the wall. And I spent my entire time, instead of listening to him, criticizing his elocution, the way he talked, the way he wouldn't make eye contact. But no matter what, God let me hear one thing. And this little guy planted in my mind that there was a loving God, that there was a God that would give you help if you asked for it. And I left there that night and I drank on the way home, and I drank some more, and I would go to meetings now and then, and I would drink. I never drank before a meeting, but I would drink often on the way home. And I never really took anything seriously. I never got a sponsor. I never did anything that was suggested in these rooms. I would maybe go to one meeting a week or something like that. But something was, what can I call, eroding on me. It was like the Chinese water torture. There was a drip, drip, drip of AA, and it was penetrating this thick skull. And I would see happy people in there. One guy named Bob Kelly, now deceased, who introduced himself as, my name is Kelly, and I don't care who knows I'm an alcoholic as long as I don't forget it. And I thought, these are all dumb things. They had sayings on the wall that I thought were all very simple and oversimplified maybe. But I kept going back. I kept going back to these meetings. And I kept getting drunk in between. I could maybe stay dry for a month, or I think the longest period was 3 months. And then when I took a drink, I was right back in the hole faster than ever before. I never got a DUI. I never crashed a car. I never was arrested. I never really got in a fight that I'm aware of, but there once in a while I'd have some bruises I couldn't explain. And I still was not blacking out, but I was augering in, and I was missing more and more work, and I was drinking more every day. And one day in 1979, I was sitting on my back porch. I have to say this too, insanity. My parents had always, I was raised in a home that they owned. My parents always owned their own house. I thought, and I always rented. And I thought maybe I need roots. So I bought a house in Chicago, and I moved into that house, and I got more drunk there than I ever did before. So that wasn't part of the solution at all. But I thought owning property would be, having nice looking suits would dress up the drunk. Didn't do a thing for the inside. I was still a mess inside. So on this Tuesday afternoon in July of 1979, I'm drunk at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the back porch of this house. And two friends of mine, two women friends of mine, walked up. They weren't in the program. They weren't girlfriends. There wasn't anything amorous about this. They came up and they found me on my back porch, and they said, Dan, we were worried. We were looking for you. You've been missing for several days. And they could obviously tell that I was drunk. And they looked at me and they said, you don't have to live like this, Dan. A word that you hear in the rooms of AA, and they weren't AAers. And I said, what do I do? And they say, we know that you've been going to AA, and we've heard that AA works. Why don't you go back? I forgot to tell you that during this period of Labor Day of 77 to this mid-July date in 79, I was also in some kind of counseling with a guy that was not a member, but knew the 12-step program. His name was Victor. I called up Victor and I said, Victor, I need to see you. Victor had always advised me to go into treatment. And I said, I'm not that bad. I don't need to go to treatment. I called Victor up, who was a very busy guy, but he made room for me. And I got in that afternoon. And I said, Victor, I'm in trouble drinking, and I think I need to go to rehab. And he said, I've been waiting for you to say that. Let's go. And he made a phone call, and I got an interview in that hospital that I went to that first meeting. And they had a very well-respected 12-step program. It was for drugs and alcohol. It was a resident program. They interviewed me. They said, we have a room for you tonight. And I said, no, I need to do something. I'll come tomorrow. And I'm sure they've heard that 1,000 times. But Victor was with me, and Victor said, if he said he's going to come tomorrow, he'll come tomorrow. I'll vouch for him. And you know what I had to do? Because all this year and a half that I was trying not to drink very unsuccessfully, I was doing it all by myself. No one in my family knew it. No one knew that I was trying to not drink anymore. And so what I had to do was go tell my parents. And I called them up and said, could I come up and see you tonight? And they said, sure. They were in a northern suburb. I went up, I talked to them. They're very loving. They didn't know anything about AA, but they knew AA, but they didn't know anything about alcoholism. And they loved me, and they said, do what you have to do. And then I went and told my next youngest sister about it, and her husband, and they were very supportive. And it was like I took a backpack of bricks off my back, and I drove back down to Chicago like a free man. I wasn't. I had a long road to go yet, but I felt like a free man. I drank that night, and you know what else? I got up the next morning and took a drink and walked over to the hospital, and that was the last drink I took. And that drink was on July the 12th of 1979, but I count my dry day from the 13th. In that program, it was a 3-week program. It was on the 5th floor of this hospital on the north side of Chicago. And it was a 12-step based program. They were very, very heavy into the big book. And after about 5 days, you know how we get. I thought I had overreacted. I was feeling pretty well. And Susie, the shooter, was giving me some kind of tranquilizer in my butt every night. And so I was feeling well. And I thought, as I said, that I overreacted. And I made up in this crazy mind that I was going to go down the fire escape that night. I was going what they call AMA, against medical advice. But before I did that, I had to wait for it to get dark. And that night they had volunteers come in that would talk to us. And this volunteer came in, his name was Ollie. Ollie was an asphalt contractor in Chicago. Rough guy, nice guy. He sat down and he talked to me. And something caused me to tell Ollie what I was going to do, planning to do. And Ollie said, Dan, and this is the first time I ever heard this, don't leave before the miracle happens. He also said, Dan, you can do anything for 2 more weeks. Stay here. Stay it out. You can get drunk all you want in 3 weeks. For some reason, I stayed. And for some reason, the last day I was there, I went from wanting to go down the fire escape to being afraid to leave, because I knew that my MO was slipping and sliding. It was not staying sober. And on my last day there, they just sort of starved me out. They didn't send lunch up that day. That was my last day. And I was walking around with this little bag and I had tears in my eyes, folks. And I was scared to death to leave. And I ran into a counselor and he gave me a hug and he said, what's wrong? And I said, I'm afraid to leave. I'm afraid I'm going to drink. And he said, well, I can't promise you that you won't drink. But and he ticked off 3 or 4 things if I did. One was go to a meeting that night. One, they had an anti-abuse program. He said, you do the anti-abuse program and get a helper through the end of the anti-abuse program. And you also do our outpatient program. But folks, he only got my percentage of success up to 50%. And as a betting guy, that's not a real good percentage, but it was better than I thought I was going to have. And then he turned me around and he pointed me looking out the window at downtown Chicago. And he said, Dan, nothing has changed out there in the last 3 weeks. Not a thing. All the bars are there. All the drunks are there. All your friends are there. But hopefully you have changed. And you're leaving here with a tool bag. In that we put some tools that you can use, but you have to pull them out. And one of those is go to a meeting tonight. I went to a meeting that night. And you know what? I didn't drink on the way home. And I went to a meeting the next day. I was a noon drinker, as you know, because that was against the rules at our company. So by then I was drinking all alone in my apartment. And they said in that 12-step program, they said, you have to find a substitute. So in my mind, they said, I've got to substitute something for noon. So I found a meeting at 12:15 downtown Chicago at a place called the Mustard Seed. And I went down there every noon for months and months and months. I'd pack a lunch, make a lunch in the morning, and I'd go down there and I'd eat that lunch there. I also learned in that meeting to open up and share. I shared in there about my worry about not being able to do a 3rd step because I was a businessman and I was paid to make things happen. And I had a little old woman sitting in front of me at this meeting who said, Sonny, I don't know what you're talking about. You're not paid to make things happen. You're only paid to make the plans. And I probably heard that 1,000 times, but that one I listened to. And I believe that. She relieved me of the thought that I had to take ownership to the outcome of what I was doing in business. Folks, it's been a long journey. It's been a wonderful journey. I've moved around an awful lot, and I've done the blocking and tackling I call it successful AA, I guess, successful living a sober life. And that is, I got a sponsor. I had a sponsor before I left that rehab. That sponsor stayed with me until I moved about 10 miles away. Said, I can't sponsor you anymore. You find a sponsor in the neighborhood where you're going. And he planted that in my mind, that I needed a sponsor that could look me in the eyeball and see what's going on with Dan and know what the meetings were in the area I was going to. I went to big book study meetings. I went to a lot of meetings. I got involved in service work. We started a Alano club on the north side of Chicago that was just a hoot and a lot of fun. It was an old Puerto Rican grocery store that a bunch of us started a club in. I was just going along with it. It just was, part of what I was told to do, to get in the middle of the boat and stay there. You're just an average bloke on the sobriety bus, and that's all I try to be. As I said, it's been a great journey. I retired from that company that I was involved with. I was the president and CEO when I left. I wasn't headed there at all. I was headed out the door. I was very successful in a couple of the hobbies. Auto racing was one of them. I had a wonderful run at that, met some great people. But the greatest success I had, and those three daughters that at one time I thought I was fooling, who talked to their mother at the time and said, next time we go on vacation with Dad, we'd like to have a court order that he not drink. At that age, I didn't know what a court order was. When my wife, former wife Diana, told me that, even though I was sober then, it was like sticking a cold steel in my gut. I wasn't fooling anyone, not even little children, just myself. That's all I was doing. I have a relationship with those three daughters that, we love each other. We go on holidays to them. I have 8 grandchildren from that former marriage. And those 3 girls, and we're in touch all the time. I have remarried a wonderful woman, even though she's getting a new hip, a wonderful woman, and we've been married 22 years, the longest relationship I've ever had. And she has no idea what alcoholism is, but before we got married, went to Al-Anon to find out who she was marrying. And I asked her to do that, and she did that. It's a relationship that I could never have had drunk. Another thing I try to do on this journey is to live this program in my house, to live this program with my family, to live this program outside of the rooms of AA. I found that the toughest, to really try to practice these principles in all my affairs as I walk this sober walk, as I trudge this road of happy destiny, and it has been a road of happy destiny. I couldn't ask for a life. Well, I'll turn it around. I say, if I had used my greatest imagination and wrote down everything I had and had Walt Disney crafted for me, I would have sold myself short on what I have been able to realize in a sober life. And I've met people on what we call the Hollywood Squares, both Tuesday night and on Saturday night. I go to Zoom. Has been a gift to me, even though I probably went to about 5 meetings a week before Zoom, and chaired meetings all whenever asked to do that. Zoom opened up a whole new world for me. It brought me closer to my God. It expanded my spiritual life immensely, because I've been able to go around and go to meetings in different places, different countries. And with that, Harvey, I think I pretty much shot my wad, and I appreciate you doing it. And I just love you guys. And this is another family I have, the Hollywood Squares on Tuesday and Saturday night. I love you all. Thank you.